New York is more than just Manhattan. In the dense forests of the Upstate and along the vast empty beaches of Long Island, there are creatures that supposedly shouldn't even exist, and spirits that still linger long after their bodies have returned to the earth. In this video, we're going to discuss some of the cryptids, tall tales, and ghost stories that litter the state of New York. Coming back next episode to do the same for New York City. So if this sounds like your kind of content, it'd help this tiny channel out a lot if you took the time to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and even maybe leave a comment saying hi. It'll never cost you a dime, and it's an easy way to tell YouTube that my little channel is worth watching. Anyways, with all of that being said, let's get into the video. Number 1 is the Cardiff Giant. On October 16th, 1869, some workers were digging in a well behind a barn belonging to one individual, William C. Newell, in Cardiff, New York, when suddenly they found something incredible buried underground. News of this incredible finding quickly spread around the region, and folks began flocking to the farm to see what it was that these workers did find. Some folks attributed religious significance to this finding, saying it was a piece of Christian history even, buried in North America. And what was this finding? A gigantic, seemingly petrified man standing at over 10 feet in height and weighing thousands of pounds. The giant body appeared to be petrified, as I said, and also appeared to be quite old. Additionally, while there hadn't been giants found before, Cardiff was no stranger to fossils, and there were many fossils deposited in nearby swamps. Now, as quickly as the rumor spread, so did speculation about where this giant came from, and so did folks hoping to profit from this finding. Almost immediately, the owner of the farm, Newell, began charging admission for curious locals to come and see the giant, attracting over 2,000 individuals in this way. Soon after the giant was put on display, though, Newell got offers to purchase the supposed giant, which were first scoffed at but eventually accepted, at a sum of $30,000. Now, it's worth noting that most individuals that saw the supposed giant believed that it was likely a statue and speculated that it may have been made in the 17th century as part of some scheme to convince Native Americans of Christianity, although some still believed that it may have been an ancient, petrified man. All of this was quickly put to rest, though, when it was discovered that this supposed giant was made of gypsum, a substance that quickly would have eroded in the wet soils of upstate New York, with many experts generally quickly realizing that the giant must have been recently buried on the property. Now, this didn't stop the profit, to be clear. Sure, experts didn't buy the giant story, but the commoners didn't know any better, with even P.T. Barnum commissioning a replica to be built and put on display in his museum in New York City. Eventually, the hoax was over, though, and one man named George Hall came forward admitting that this was all an elaborate hoax. Apparently, in 1868, Hall, a scammer, to be frank, came up with the idea of burying a giant statue on someone's property and commissioned this giant to be chiseled from a 5-ton block of gypsum, having a Chicago stonecutter chisel it before swearing him to silence. Hall then hired men to bury the statue after having it washed in acid to make it appear far older than it actually was. So if Hall's story is to be believed, which, I think it is, given scientists of the time basically figured out the story's ending before it was discussed publicly by Hall, then this whole Cardiff giant business is, in fact, a giant hoax. But a giant hoax that created an urban legend. At number 2, we have the Amityville horror haunting. In Long Island's New York City suburb of Amityville, on November 13th of 1974, a quiet little town experienced a saga of tragedies and horrors of seemingly otherworldly origin that would ignite not only a media franchise, but an urban legend that, to this day, has yet to be quelled. Dubbed the Horror House following the events that took place there, the setting for this event is a 3-story Dutch colonial home located at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. From what I can tell, though, given this property is still residential, they changed the address of the home, and for privacy reasons, I won't share that new address in this video. Also, it's worth noting that this house is by no means shabby. In 2016, prior to the COVID-19 related increase in housing prices, the home sold for $850,000 to a new resident at one point, which should put it well above $1 million in today's dollars. But anyways, in 1927, when this home was built, the story goes that this property was built on top of a Native American burial ground, and one of its first few owners was also apparently a member of the Church of Satan, though what I will say is that I couldn't find any proof of these claims. Regardless, these stories are now claimed as responsible for the events that transpired in the home. As I said, the notable events took place on November 13th of 1974, when one family member of the DeFeo family ended the lives of the rest. Ronald Joseph DeFeo, a 23-year-old member of the family, woke in the middle of the night on this evening and wandered his home, slaying his 4 siblings and parents, and then shortly after wandered to a nearby bar where he begged for help, claiming, "You gotta help me, I think my mother and father are shot." He even speculated that a notable mob hitman was the perpetrator, but funny enough, the hitman had too good of an alibi to have this pinned on him, and eventually DeFeo was persuaded to admit that the attacks were his doing, eventually pleading insanity and spending life in prison before passing away in 2021. As you'd expect, the home didn't see a new buyer immediately. It took about a year for someone crazy enough to pop up to present themselves as the new owner, buying the home well under market value because of the horrors that took place there. This new family moved in, and even had a Catholic priest bless the home before moving in. This blessing apparently did not do the trick though, as in a book written about the Amityville haunting by one J. Anson, the Amityville Horror, which was published in 1977, he recalled that the new family got a call from the Catholic priest on Christmas Eve, and that the priest told them that he'd heard a voice telling them to get out of the house during his blessing, even warning them to stay away from the bedroom on the second floor, which had previously been the room of the DeFeo parents. Of course, despite this warning, this was still their home, so it's assumed that they somewhat ignored these pleas, and as a result, events occurred that sent them running on January 14th of 1976. AKA, given this family moved in just before Christmas, they didn't last long in the home. Now, some folks do speculate that this was all just a bunch of paranoia being at play, because shortly after this, a new family did move into the home who lived there a whole decade and experienced nothing paranormal whatsoever during that time. There's also some more dubiousness to the claims of what went on in this house and whether there's actually a haunting there in the first place. To start, the new family's priest blessing the house couldn't seem to be verified, and again, the new family continued to refute claims of paranormal happenings. Even claims of seemingly mundane things like the new family finding footprints in the snow around the house were refuted, as apparently in the time that the new family lived there had been no snow. In general though, folks thought that yes, a tragic attack occurred in this home, but the paranormal claims were all a hot can of beans. Despite this though, the children of the new family that moved in and were apparently harassed by ghosts claimed that the haunting was genuine. Although, let's be clear, these days you've probably heard the name Amityville, and I'd suspect that's because the story is mentioned in many books and movies. And who do you think is getting paid royalties here? I'll just leave it at that. Number 3 is the Beast of Sherman, New York. In the 1960s, a creature supposedly resembling something prehistoric showed itself near Sherman, New York. And while scarcely documented, the obscurity of this creature is what some claim may be the proof of its existence. The only known documentation of this creature comes from author John Keel, who also authored the book The Mothman Prophecies that you may have heard of, about the famous West Virginia cryptid, the Mothman. In this letter, that was supposedly written in the 1970s, a 15-year-old Sherman, New York native described his encounter with a large hairy creature. This child apparently lived near a swamp in Sherman, New York in the 60s or 70s, likely along one of the many rivers that run through the town like a spiderweb, and whatever this creature was would frequently visit the property of this child. The young man described the creature as white, standing over 12 feet tall, and claimed he'd seen 2 of them on occasion. It apparently would alternate between walking on 2 and 4 legs, and his whole family had seen the creature. Now, of course, children tell stories, but for whatever reason, John Keel felt that the story was compelling enough to include it in a book he wrote about unknown creatures titled The Complete Guide to Mysterious Beings. Many believe that this creature was included because of its likeness to the ancient South American creature, the Mapinguari, a hairy, humanoid cyclops-like being, or perhaps the Megatherium, an extinct variety of giant ground sloth that was native to South America. It's worth noting that others also liken the mapinguari to a bastardization of a giant ground sloth as well. And while this might sound absolutely insane to some, it's worth noting that there is a grain of scientific plausibility that giant ground sloths lived far more recently than most would think, as in 1995, giant ground sloth bones were found that had been modified into primordial pendants in South America, suggesting that ancient humans in the Americas may have at one point coexisted with giant ground sloths. At number 4, we have the Oniate. Now this one's short, but have you ever heard of the legend of the dry hand? Yes? No? Well, according to Iroquois, Seneca, and Cayuga natives, there's something haunted, wandering, and perhaps floating along the Genessee River, or Finger Lakes region of New York State. This creature, referred to as the Oniate, is a bit of a boogeyman. According to legends, this isn't just any old hand, but rather a flying or floating arm or hand that makes its way around the upstate New York area, looking for someone to afflict. It's said that perhaps, if you're a poorly behaved individual, possibly even someone who's spoken ill of the dead, the arm might seek you out, and this flying arm will touch you. And if it does indeed make contact with you, you'll either get some sort of disease or possibly go blind. Number 5 is Rolling Hills Asylum. If you have an affinity for the paranormal, you've probably heard of Rolling Hills. Originally called the Genessee County Poor Farm, this asylum was a poorhouse, rather than what we typically think of as asylums that are portrayed in the media today. If you don't know, by the way, a poorhouse is basically a place where not-so-well-off individuals were homed with public funds back in the day. Often these were children, but also sometimes widows or disabled individuals. In exchange for lodging, folks living there were required to work on the farm though, hence its naming the Genessee County Poor Farm. This might sound strange to you too, but in the 19th and 20th centuries, this was actually pretty common, and these were typically run by local governments rather than federal ones. Now, this particular poorhouse was opened in January of 1827 by the County of Genessee, or today's Wyoming County, and made drunkards, mentally handicapped individuals, unemployed individuals, blind folks, and vagrants all welcome to come live at this facility. The facility itself was big too, with land spanning over 200 acres that grew trees and food to feed and keep the residents warm. Being a nearly self-sufficient facility and costing only about $1 per week to house individuals in 1871 money, or about closer to $30 in today's money. Residents staying at this facility didn't just farm either. Those that were capable of working would make wares to sell on behalf of the farm, raised livestock, made and canned jams, baked bread and pastries, and even made coffins, some of which were used to bury the residents of the asylum on site if no family claimed the bodies. This last case wasn't rare either, as more than 1,700 individuals were buried on site before its closing in 1974. And this in particular is what some point to as the source of the many supposed hauntings of Rolling Hills Asylum. One of these hauntings is by a man referred to as Roy, who, according to some, is 7 feet tall and resembles a notable tall patient named Roy, who did live most of his life at Rolling Hills Asylum before passing away in 1942 on the premises. This patient sadly had gigantism, deforming him and causing him to grow to his notable height. Neurologically speaking, Roy was totally normal, but because he looked strange, his family, a family of well-off bankers, left him at Rolling Hills, where he lived between the ages of 12 and 62. By all accounts, Roy is a kind spirit. In his life, he was known for being a nice person with a love for music, and modern accounts mirror this, with one in particular recounting a troublesome rat being put down right next to a giant, bloody handprint pressed into the asylum wall. Though macabre, this event was interpreted as Roy's spirit trying to quell the rats that were scaring the stewards of Rolling Hills Asylum. Not all of the spirits here are kind-hearted, though. In particular, there was a nurse named Emmy who was supposedly quite cruel and frequently unhappy, and rumors swirled that this Emmy even dabbled in black magic. Sometimes they say you might hear cackling coming from the old infirmary, and if you do, it might be her spirit paying you a visit. There's also a spirit of an old woman named Hattie, unrelated to Nashville's Hattie B's Hot Chicken as far as I can tell, that yells hello to those who visit the asylum. As the story goes, she was blind and would frequently scream hello to get the attention of workers at the asylum. In addition to the notable guests, there's also parts of the asylum that are known for frequent shadowy figures roaming around, the morgue where folks hear disembodied voices and see large items occasionally shift, and more. Regardless of where the activity is though, it seems like a good fraction of the old 1700 patients might still be roaming the building they used to call home. And last up, we have the Montauk Monster. On Ditch Plains Beach, over 100 miles drive from Manhattan, on July 12th of 2008, a 26-year-old woman and her friends found a strange creature that had perished and washed ashore, lying on the beach. And this creature sparked speculation and controversy over what it was and whether it might be something never before seen. Now, for copyright reasons, I can't show you the creature, but it really looks bizarre and doesn't look like anything run-of-the-mill that you might find. Certainly not on Long Island, at least. While clearly battered, it has a long tail, strange claw-like hands, and almost appears to have a beak, if you don't look too closely at it at least. Originally, this photo was published in a newspaper, where the author posited that it could have been a turtle, or maybe a mutant created by the nearby Plum Island Animal Disease Center. Now, shortly after this photograph ran in the newspaper, folks went looking for it, but, given it was on a beach, it had either washed away or been predated or something else. But in its absence, folks speculated that it might have been taken away by somebody and might even be being hidden, though these claims were denied by about everyone involved. The media frenzy only grew from here, as the website Gawker.com eventually shared the photo of the creature in an article titled "Dead Monster Washes Ashore in Montauk," creating a frenzy of speculation which cemented the Montauk Monster as an urban legend, even landing it a solid few minutes on the show Ancient Aliens, where folks speculated whether it was some sort of alien. Now, moving on from speculation, let's talk a bit more scientifically. As I said, initial speculation thought the creature might have been a turtle without a shell, but turtle shells are fused to their spines, so taking one off would have left more of a mark. Other more scientific inquiry thought it might have been a dog or a large rodent, or at least per the inquiry of Stony Brook University's Living Marine Resource Institute, a fake, with their next best guess being a dog or a coyote that had spent a bit of time out in the water. Other folks think the creature might be a raccoon, although the proportions were said to not really match up, or perhaps a sheep, if not for the fact that sheep don't really have sharp teeth like the pictured creature. Now, I think you can see where I'm going here. The creature was hard to identify, perhaps because it was something undiscovered, or perhaps because it was fake, but possibly, equally likely, because it was a normal creature deformed by an unusual amount of time swirling around in the Atlantic Ocean. These days, most folks disagree with previous speculation that the creature couldn't have been a raccoon, and generally think that the Montauk Monster mystery is clearly just a raccoon, an animal native to Long Island that lost its hair and washed up on the beach. Boring, I know, but in my eyes, a reasonable conclusion to this mystery. Thank you all for joining me today on this journey through New York State. Remember, if you liked this video and want future videos and past videos from me to show up on your feed, that you can subscribe to this channel and even like this video if you want the world to know that I exist. This way you won't miss it when we move on to our next episode, New York City. And remember, most importantly, whether you just saw a giant ground sloth wandering around in your backyard, or if you were kayaking and you saw a ghostly hand float by, don't you ever forget, it's always story time.